I don't know how I can respond. So much gaslighting from the very beginning. John has been on the ground in Gaza, yeah, as an embed. I love it when John and Douglas Murray and these people say, oh, we've been on the ground in Gaza. Yeah, as guests of the Israeli military that's doing the killing, starving and maiming. And you've come back and done exactly what they wanted to do. You've done their propaganda for them. Journalists have not been allowed freely into Gaza. That's why every major media organization on planet Earth has said to the Israeli government, you must allow journalists in. The Palestinian journalists who are there have been killed in record numbers. Of course, Piers, you're right. They want to hide what they're doing. That's why they're killing the journalists there and blocking the journalists from coming in. This idea that he's been on the ground. Yeah, I did interview a doctor, a British plastic surgeon, Dr. Tom Patoka. And by the way, he wasn't in the European hospital because the hospital got bombed by Israel. So he was in another hospital, and he talked to me about how he has to treat patients who have maggots in their wounds. He has to treat patients without limbs. He has to treat children. I've interviewed multiple doctors on the ground in Gaza, actually in Gaza, not hanging around with Israeli military. And they've all said the same thing. American doctors, British doctors, Canadian doctors. They've all talked about how many kids they saw with sniper bullets to the head and chest. Israel does intentionally kill civilians. That's why Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant were indicted at the International Criminal Court for precisely those charges, for killing, willful killing of Palestinians, for murder and persecution. That's why they've been indicted. That's why every human rights group in the world says war crimes are being committed. They've killed people holding white flags. We've seen it with our own eyes. They've bombed buildings without warning with families inside, like the Al-Dos family that I often cite in October 2023. They've dropped 2,000-pound bombs on refugee camps full of hundreds of people. They have killed 7 aid workers in a clearly marked World Central Kitchen aid convoy. They've bombed World Food Programme convoys, leading to Cindy McCain, the wife of the most pro-Israeli senator of my lifetime, to come out and condemn Israel for attacking aid workers. John wants you to ignore Cindy McCain and British and American doctors and human rights groups and your own lying eyes watching people with white flags being gunned down. He wants you to believe him and his Israeli military minders.
OK, Mehdi, before we go back to John to respond to that, the question that he raised, and I think I've asked you this before, but I'm still curious about, given the way this has all played out, how should, and I saw Bassem Youssef being asked this on trigonometry last week, I think it was, and he struggled to answer. How should Israel have responded to a terrorist attack, which, just to remind viewers, over 1,200 people were murdered, nearly 7,000 more were wounded, over 250 people, including babies and Holocaust survivors, were kidnapped and taken hostage, and many of those have died. How should Israel have responded to the biggest attack on its people and its land since its existence?
So there's no easy answer to that question, Piers, and you might not like the answer I give you, which is that Israel should have responded by abiding by international law, by sticking with the rules of armed conflict, by targeting only the people they believe carried out the crime. They should have used an international coalition of countries that was fully behind them. The majority of the world was behind Israel after the tragedy of October the 7th. And by the way, I have a longer memory than maybe some people in this country. After 9/11, I got asked the same question. Well, what should we do if we don't bomb Afghanistan? What should we do if we don't go after bin Laden, etc.? How did that work out? 23 years later, your pal Donald Trump, Piers, is taking pictures with the former leader of Al-Qaeda, who's still on a globally designated terrorist wanted list, right? That's where we came. The war on terror was a complete failure. And some of us who saw that, and by the way, Joe Biden even said this in one of his more coherent moments. He said Israel should learn from our lessons. Israel did not learn from the US lessons. And actually, even if you forget about all the innocent Palestinians they killed, even if you don't give a shit about the people of Gaza, even if you only care about the people of Israel, Israel's not any safer today. Israel is not winning this war. John said on Times Radio a year ago, I went back and checked, March of last year, John said, we're very close to winning. Israel's close to victory. Over a year later, they're not close to victory. They're just starving children and denying baby formula. And the former Israeli general who ran the Gaza division said a few months ago, Hamas is winning this war. So they've not made themselves any more secure. I don't have some perfect solution for what they should have done on October 7th, but I do think they shouldn't have killed 50 to 100,000 people, and they should have made themselves less secure. And by the way, the Prime Minister should have resigned because he's the one who let it happen on his watch.
Well, I certainly agree with that. And I do think there'll be a day of reckoning for Netanyahu. The problem is, John, that Netanyahu is facing corruption charges in a trial, which may well lead to his imprisonment if he's convicted. So there's no motivation for him to bring this to an end anytime soon. And listen, I agree with Mehdi. You know, this was supposed to have been a war that Israel, with its massively superior military, could have ended quite quickly. My question for you, John, you're a military expert, is when you look at the way that Israel went after Hezbollah, with that extraordinary pager attack that was unleashed on 3,000 members of Hezbollah. you think if you've got the capability to do that through Mossad and your other agencies, there were only 25,000 Hamas terrorists, we believe, at the start of this war. Why could they not have deployed similar sophisticated technology in a way that did not involve the mass slaughter of so many civilians in a place where the population is 50% under 18?
Sure. I mean, not to say that experts are a good thing, but Mehdi has said he doesn't know much about military affairs, but he does talk about it a lot. So in your question, it's pretty easy to answer, is that it's a clear sign that Israel did disengage from Gaza. And the human intelligence that was required to pull off a historic pager operation against Hezbollah couldn't be replicated because Israel didn't have that level of intelligence in Gaza because it had disengaged and allowed Hamas to build this, what is a military challenge no military has faced in the history of really any war. And the fact that Hezbollah did let the civilians get out of southern Lebanon as the war began against them is a telling marker of why people can't understand what's going on in Gaza. Now, you didn't ask me the question of what Israel should have done, because I actually teach urban warfare at this scale. I've actually studied the history of urban warfare from Stalingrad to Fallujah, Mosul, Mawar, you name it. And when I said those statements on Time Radio, if the world would have allowed Israel to continue, 5 divisions going heavy against Hamas, moving civilians out of harm's way, we'd be in a different place. And this hypocrisy of the numbers, right? So there's 3 types of lies, damn lies, and statistics. There's been 85,000 children under the age of 5 who have died from starvation in Yemen since the Yemen civil war. I don't see protests and I don't see daily coverage on what's going on in Yemen where there's 2 million people actually starving. So I actually know what is possible to achieve the goals that Israel said, and I've interviewed Prime Minister Netanyahu myself. The goals haven't changed, and they are achievable, and if you don't achieve them, you're only going to continue the cycle of violence. And had the world not stopped Israel back when they said, don't go to Rafah, you can't use big bombs against people in tunnels. This is crazy on what we're setting the standard for. This Israeli standard for war, if it continues, any nation trying to defend itself after being an attempted actual genocide against its people won't be able to. So I'm saying that Israel has done more to protect civilians in war, even when Hamas, who uses human sacrifice, is trying to get civilians killed. And they say this isn't John Spencer's word. Israel's done more to protect civilians than any other military in any comparable situation against something that nobody has seen as this evil of Hamas.
But if you're right, John, if you're right, why are so many of Israel's allies now turning on Israel? Why is the UK